Have you ever given everything to someone and watched them treat you like you were nothing? Have you ever loved so hard, sacrificed so much, poured yourself into people who never even noticed you were drowning, and then one day realized they never saw you as family at all? If you've ever felt used, discarded, or invisible in a place you helped build with your own hands, then this story is going to hit places inside you that you didn't even know were still hurting. Stay until the very end, because the revenge in this story is not loud, it's not violent, it's not dramatic for the sake of drama. It's the kind of revenge that only a woman who was silent for 20 years could deliver. And trust me, the ending will leave you speechless. If you're new here, subscribe right now, because this channel tells stories for women who were underestimated and came back to remind the world that quiet does not mean weak. Now, let me tell you the story of a Black woman who raised a Korean man's son for 20 years, loved that boy like he came from her own body, and on his wedding day was thrown away like she never existed. Her name was Amira. She was 20 years old when she met Kang Seo-jin. It was in Seoul, during the kind of winter that made you forget the sun existed. Amira had come from Nigeria 2 years earlier on a scholarship that fell through after one semester. Instead of going home with nothing to show for it, she stayed, took odd jobs, cleaned, cooked, tutored, survived the way women like her always survived, by being too stubborn to quit and too proud to ask for help. Seo-jin was 31 at the time, a successful Korean businessman with real estate holdings across Gangnam, a cold reputation in the boardroom, and a 1-year-old son named Do-yeon, whose mother had vanished 6 months after giving birth. She left a note that said she wasn't built for this life. She took nothing except her freedom. Seo-jin didn't chase her. He never spoke about her again. But the baby still needed someone. He went through 4 nannies in 5 months. None of them lasted. The child screamed through the night, refused bottles from strangers. Seo-jin, a man who could close million-dollar deals without blinking, had no idea how to hold his own son without the boy crying harder. Amira was working as a part-time housekeeper in his building when she first heard the baby crying through the walls. One evening, she knocked on the door. Seo-jin opened it looking like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. The baby was wailing in his arms. Amira didn't ask for permission. She reached out, took the child gently, held him against her chest and hummed something low and soft, a melody her mother used to sing back home. Within 2 minutes, Do-yeon stopped crying. Within 5, he was asleep. Seo-jin stared at her like she had performed a miracle. The next day, he offered her a full-time position. She moved in. She raised the boy. She fed him, bathed him, held him through fevers, walked him to his first day of school, helped him with homework she sometimes barely understood herself, learned Korean fluently so he would never feel like his home was divided, sat through every parent meeting, every school play, every tantrum, every nightmare. She was there for all of it. Seo-jin was not. He worked, he traveled, he built his empire. He came home late and left early. He spoke to Amira about schedules and expenses, never about feelings. When Do-yeon was 5, Seo-jin proposed to her, not with flowers, not with romance, with a contract. He told her it would be easier for the household, for appearances, for Do-yeon's school records, for his business reputation, if they were legally married. Amira should have said no. She knew he didn't love her. She knew this was an arrangement dressed in a ring. But she looked at the little boy sleeping down the hall, the boy who called her Oma, the boy who ran to her and not his father when he was scared, and she said yes, not for Seo-jin, for Do-yeon. And for the next 20 years, she kept that promise. She raised Do-yeon into a man. A tall, confident, educated, well-spoken young man who graduated top of his class, who spoke 3 languages, who carried himself with the kind of quiet discipline that people admired. Everyone praised Sejin for raising such a fine son. Nobody mentioned Amira. She was the woman in the background, the wife who didn't quite fit, the Black woman in a Korean world who was tolerated because she was useful, not because she was valued. At dinner parties, Sejin was introduced as my wife without warmth. At family gatherings, Sejin's relatives looked through her like glass. At school events, other mothers whispered behind manicured hands. Amira endured all of it because every time she thought about leaving, Do-yeon would say something like, "Oma, thank you for always being here." And that was enough. Until it wasn't. Do-yeon met a girl in university. Her name was Yuna, the daughter of a wealthy Korean family with political connections and old money. Beautiful, polished, cold in a way that reminded Amira uncomfortably of Sejin. The relationship moved fast. Within a year, they were engaged. Amira tried to be happy. She planned, she organized, she helped choose the venue, the flowers, the menu. She spent weeks preparing because this was her son's wedding. The boy she had raised from a screaming baby was becoming a man, and she wanted the day to be perfect. The morning of the wedding, Amira put on the dress she had bought with money she had saved carefully over months. It wasn't designer, it wasn't expensive, but it was beautiful, and she felt beautiful in it. She arrived at the venue early. She walked toward the family preparation room, expecting to help with last-minute details. Instead, she found Sejin standing in the hallway with Yuna's mother, a sharp-faced woman in a cream Chanel suit, who looked at Amira the way someone looks at a stain on a white tablecloth. Sejin's expression told her everything before anyone spoke. "Amira," he said, "Yuna's family has made a request." She waited. "They feel it would be best if you were not seated with the family today." The words didn't register at first. They would prefer if you watched from the back, or perhaps waited in another room until the ceremony is over. Amira felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "Excuse me?" Yuna's mother stepped forward. "Please understand, this is a very important day for our families. The guests are high profile. We simply feel that the optics would be better if the family table reflected, well, the family." She let the last word hang in the air like a verdict. Amira looked at Sejin. 20 years. 20 years of marriage. 20 years of raising his son. 20 years of silently enduring a life with no love, no recognition, no voice, just so this family could function. And he stood there, silent, not defending her, not even looking her in the eye. She turned to find Do-yeon. He was in the groom's suite, adjusting his tie in the mirror. He looked so handsome, so grown, so much like the baby she had held against her chest that first night. "Do-yeon," she said. He turned. "Alma, what's wrong?" She told him. She expected outrage. She expected him to storm out and confront his father, to defend the woman who had given him everything. Instead, he hesitated. He looked at the door, then at her. "Alma, can we talk about this after the ceremony? I don't want to cause problems today." Something inside Amira cracked. Not broke, cracked. Because breaking would come later. She looked at the boy she raised. The boy who used to cry if she left the room for too long. The boy who once said he wanted to marry someone just like her. And she saw a stranger. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She smiled softly, touched his face one last time, and said, "You look perfect." Then she turned and walked out of the venue. She didn't watch from the back. She didn't wait in another room. She left. That night, alone in the apartment she had shared with a man who never loved her for 20 years, Amira sat in the dark and finally let herself feel all of it. Every holiday she'd spent pretending the silence didn't hurt. Every night she'd gone to sleep beside a man whose back was always turned. Every time someone looked through her. Every time she swallowed her pride for the sake of peace. She cried for 3 hours. And then she stopped. She stood up, she walked to the bathroom mirror, and she looked at herself for a long time. 40 years old, 20 years gone. No degree in her name, no property, no savings beyond what she had hidden carefully in a small account over the years. Nothing, that's what they expected her to have. But here is the twist nobody saw coming. Amira had not spent 20 years doing nothing. While Seo-jin slept, while Do-yeon studied, while the world ignored her, Amira had been quietly building. It started small. When Do-yeon was in middle school, she began taking online courses at night. Business, finance, marketing. She studied on her phone while waiting at school pickups. She read textbooks in the bathroom because it was the only room no one disturbed her in. When Do-yeon entered high school, she started a small online business selling handmade African print accessories, bags, head wraps, jewelry. She ran it under a different name. She never told Seo-jin. She never told anyone. The business grew slowly, then faster. By the time Do-yeon was in university, Amira's company had expanded into a legitimate fashion brand with customers in Korea, Japan, Nigeria, the UK, and the US. She had over 40,000 followers on social media under a brand name nobody connected to the quiet wife of Kang Seo-jin. She had saved and reinvested carefully. She had an accountant, a small warehouse, a growing team she managed entirely through her phone, and a laptop she kept hidden in a closet. She wasn't poor. She wasn't helpless. She had simply never shown them who she really was. The week after the wedding, Amira filed for divorce. Seo-jin was confused, not heartbroken. Confused, because he had never imagined she would leave. She was supposed to be grateful. She was supposed to endure. She was supposed to stay quiet forever. His lawyer drafted a settlement offering her almost nothing because on paper she had nothing. No assets, no income, no leverage. That was the second twist. Amira's lawyer, a woman she had quietly retained 2 years earlier, presented the court with full documentation of Amira's business, her income, her independent assets, and most importantly, a clause buried in the original marriage contract that Seo-jin's own lawyer had written carelessly 20 years ago. The clause granted the spouse 50% of any jointly occupied property in the event of divorce if the marriage lasted more than 15 years. Seo-jin had never read his own contract carefully. The penthouse they lived in, the vacation property in Jeju, the commercial building in Gangnam where part of his company operated, Amira was entitled to half. Seo-jin's face in the courtroom went white. But Amira wasn't done. She didn't take the properties. She negotiated a clean cash settlement, signed away the real estate, and walked out of that marriage with exactly what she needed: freedom, capital, and a reputation she was about to reveal to the world. Within 3 months, Amira launched her brand publicly under her own name for the first time. She did interviews, she appeared in fashion magazines, she was invited to speak at a women's entrepreneurship summit in Seoul. The same city that had treated her like a ghost now wanted to hear her story. Within 6 months, she opened a flagship boutique in Itaewon. The press called her the woman who built an empire in silence. Within a year, her brand was featured in Vogue Korea. People who had once looked through her at dinner parties now wanted invitations to hers. And then the regret came. Do-yeon's marriage fell apart within 8 months. Yoona was not the woman she pretended to be. She was controlling, image-obsessed, and cruel behind closed doors. The warmth Do-yeon had grown up with, the patience, the kindness, the unconditional love, none of it existed in his new home. He started calling Amira. She didn't answer. He sent messages. She read them but didn't reply. One day, he showed up at her boutique. She saw him through the glass before he walked in. The tall young man in an expensive coat who looked so much like his father, but carried, somewhere deep in his face, the softness she had put there. He stood in front of her, and his eyes filled with tears. "Amma, I'm sorry." Amira looked at him for a long time. "I know," she said, "but sorry doesn't give me back 20 years. He broke down. She didn't comfort him, not because she didn't love him. She did. She always would. But because she had finally learned that loving someone and allowing them to destroy you are not the same thing. She told him he was welcome in her life, but never again as someone who could stand by while she was erased. He nodded. He understood. And then came Sejin. He appeared at her boutique one evening after closing. Older now, thinner, something hollow behind his eyes that hadn't been there before. He stood in the doorway of the shop she had built with the life he thought was empty. He looked around at the fabrics, the designs, the awards on the wall, the magazine covers framed by the register. "I didn't know," he said quietly. Amira folded a scarf without looking at him. "You didn't ask. I made a mistake. You made a choice. Every single day for 20 years, you made a choice." He stepped closer. "Can we start over?" She finally looked at him. The man she had married at 20. The man she had given her youth to. The man who had let another woman's mother erase her from his family portrait on the most important day of their son's life. She studied his face and felt something she didn't expect. Nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not longing. Just peace. "No," she said. Not with bitterness, not with revenge in her voice, just with the calm certainty of a woman who had finally found herself after 20 years of being invisible. "You had me, Se-jin, and you didn't want me. That's not something you get to undo because you're lonely now." He left. She locked the door behind him, and for the first time in 20 years, the silence in the room didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like freedom. Months later, Amira sat in the front row of a fashion show in Seoul, wearing a dress from her own collection. The lights were bright, the cameras were flashing. People who had once whispered about her now whispered her name with admiration. She didn't smile for the cameras. She didn't perform gratitude. She simply sat there, calm, elegant, and untouchable. Not because someone powerful stood beside her, but because she had finally become the most powerful person in her own story. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse that now felt too large and too empty, a man stared at her face on a magazine cover and realized what he had lost. Not a wife, not a housekeeper, not a convenience. A woman who had been extraordinary all along. He just never bothered to look. Now, if this story moved you, if it made you angry or made you cry or made you want to stand up and cheer, then subscribe right now so you never miss another story like this. And leave me a comment below telling me which part hit you the hardest. Was it the moment they told her to sit in the back at the wedding? Was it when Do-yoon said, "Can we talk about this after the ceremony?" Was it the twist that she had been building an empire in silence the entire time? Was it when Se-jin said, "You had me and you didn't want me"? Or was it the ending, when she finally sat in the front row of her own life? Tell me. I read every single comment, and I'll catch you in the next video.